All right, everybody. Hi, welcome. We will get started. We're 4 after. I want to be conscious that I know some of you are on lunchtime, others are morning. So thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Hello, Christian. So today
Hello.
I'm joined by my colleague Christian Bourque out of our Montreal office. Christian and I presented last year's webinar as well, the financial side of things with our third youth series last year. This year we're here together to present being a young consumer in 2022. So in our fourth iteration of the youth study, which is what this year's study is, we really wanted to understand how youth purchase, what they're looking for, what their behaviors are, and how that relates to some of the values and opinions that we discussed in last week's webinar, which was understanding youth as a citizen. For those of you that weren't on the webinar last year, we will be making those recordings available to all participants, and we'll be posting those when we release the report at the end of this year. Just so everyone's aware, we'll be recording today's webinar as well, and that will be sent to you later this afternoon. The full report of the study will be sent to everyone who registered at the end of the year before the end of December. We also want to point out that if you have any questions, we'll be taking them at the end of the presentation, and you can post those questions just in the chat box. There's a question actual box where you can put those, and we'll pull those out at the end of the presentation to go over those. Christian, I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Allison Watson. I'm a Senior Research Director out of our Edmonton office, and this is my second year presenting the youth study findings. So I'm very excited and honored to be here with everyone for the fourth iteration. And Christian?
Yes, thank you, Allison. My name is Christian Bourque. I'm Executive Vice President at Léger, managing our Montreal office. And I've been involved in the last four iterations of the study, and it keeps evolving over time. And now new collaborators coming in like Allison and some of our buddies as well from the Toronto office jumping in. It only gets better and better.
Yeah, and that's one great point that Christian made is he's been very heavily involved with this study since its inception 4 years ago. So we have a few slides that we're going to be pulling in today from previous iterations of the study that really help to understand some of the results that we heard this year. So we'll make note of that as we carry forward. So a little bit of background on the methodology, because what would be a presentation about research without understanding what we did first? So this year's data was collected mid-late October to early November. We surveyed just over 3,000 millennials and Gen Zers. Within that 3,000, it was just over 2,000 millennials and 1,000 members of the Gen Z. What we also like to point out, which helps understand what the population is looking like, is some of these key demographic identifiers. So we notice here that we have 20% of our population that we surveyed were French speaking, 64% were English, and 16% were other. We also found that 25% identify as a visible minority, 43% identifies having a religious affiliation, and 16% identify as being members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. And this is a slight increase over last year, so definitely something that we're seeing increasing as the years go on.
Allison, sorry, we can't see the presentation moving forward.
Oh, sorry, guys. All right, so there's our beautiful pictures.
Hey.
There's the breakdown of the methodology for everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Christian. And then over onto the importance of the young consumer. So if you cued in last week, we start off all of these presentations with a little bit of background into the generations and why we look at youth and why they're important. So this is going to be a quick little recap of some of that. And then we're going to take a little bit of a spin on our microgeneration labels that we did last week, which I'll go over in just a couple slides as well, but just a little bit of precursor for those who were involved last week. This is going to be a little bit of a refresher for all of you. So when we look at generations, the importance of generations is that within each of the generations, there's common values, opinions, and perceptions that kind of tie these generations together. Very important to know and understand when you're really trying to generate consumers help them form their habits, especially what we'll go over in a little bit with this study. But as a whole, we're looking at, and we generally look at these four segments of generations. So we have our baby boomers, which are our largest generation subgroup. So they represent 22% of the population. They're currently between the ages of 57 and 76 years old. The sort of historic big life event that ties them all together or really defines their generation was the glorious 30s, so the period of prosperity. And of course, what would be a presentation about youth without talking about some of the technological advances and the big technology evolution that we saw among the baby boomers was the television, which of course has continued to grow and evolve, but very defining for this group. Generation X, 41 to 56 years old, they're 19% of the population, so a little bit less. Among them, we really saw the saturated labor market and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and of course, the evolution, the birth, the really kind of all-encompassing of all of our life aspects, evolution of the internet. Among the millennials, so Gen Y, 25 to 40 years old right now. And we see these broken up into two micro generations as well. And then they're 21% of the population. We see them having a lot of globalization here and job insecurity. There's been a lot of things that have happened to this generation, and as well as generations before them that have had impacts on these specific employment or kind of what they want from life that lend to this kind of qualifier that we've put for them. And what evolved for them was instant messaging and social media. So this was something that if the parents of the generation before thought the internet was bad, along came instant messaging, which opened up a whole new can of worms and had to adapt, parenting, adapt how youth grew up, what we were exposed to. So instant messaging and social media just exploded among the millennials. Then we move over to the Generation Zs. So they're 11 to 24 years old right now, so a little bit younger, but they're having a lot of impact, and they're a very important audience to keep track of and really get in front of to ensure that, as you'll find out later, you're there when they're forming their habits as they continue to grow. So among this generation, we're seeing a lot of instability and job shortages. Again, a lot of big life events, a lot of big social issues coming about right now that's really impacting this generation. And for those of us growing up, or for those of you who had children or are parents of millennials, if you thought instant messaging and social media was something crazy to wrap your head around, now we're dealing with the algorithms and evolution of AI and how much impact that has in reaching youth today, not only in how they're receiving information, consuming information, dissecting information, but how they're being reached out to and targeted as consumers. So this slide we show very often as well, the evolution of the Canadian population. So if you watched last week, we went a little bit further back, but here we're just going to show from 2005 to 2019, and then projection to 2035. So while yes, the population is growing, it's becoming more dispersed, leveling out, but what's important to note here is that as the population ages and as these youth age, so does their purchasing power. So that's something that we really want to keep in mind as we're carrying on through the conversation today as well. So here is our wonderful timeline of the millennials. So the 13 to 19 last week, we identified these as our carefree millennials. So 13 to 19 years old, not really having to worry about too much yet, really just focusing on social interactions, kind of primary school, maybe figuring out what you want to do later on. And now we've kind of defined them as consumers as the first times. This is when they're getting their first taste of experiences, their first taste of purchases, their first kind of solo adventures as people rather than as children of their parents. And the next slide, I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. As they grow, we move over, to first habits. So those 20 to 29-year-olds, which we previously called the turbulence. So they're exploring a lot. They're changing their mind. They're not afraid to try new things. They're really not quite sure what they're having. There's a lot of instability here among this generation. But in terms of their consumer habits, this is when they're really starting to form who they are as a consumer. So what they value, what they want from a brand, how they identify in a brand, and how that brand identifies to them, more importantly. So this is really where they're starting to form those first habits. After they've finished the first times, you can move to your first habits. And this is where it's really critical to ensure that brands are tailoring their messaging, tailoring their products, tailoring their approaches to these consumers to ensure that you're part of their habit formation while they move over to their first expenses. So when we get into the first expenses, you're a little bit older, you have more work stability, hopefully more financial stability. You're able to start thinking of things like long-term relationships, family, perhaps further education. You're also looking at things like maybe you're going to purchase your first car, whether it's new to you or brand new, but it's a first purchase that you're making without perhaps the support, financial support specifically of your parents, as well as first homes. And here as well, you throw in kids into the mix, and that's a whole other ball game of firsts, and kind of the realization of what it really means to kind of be a grown-up rather than a youth. So one key thing to take away here is, for the consumer, you really, really want to make sure that you're making a mark and making an impact among those first habits. Let them explore things in the firsts, but if you can make an impact in having the millennials identify with your brand during those first habit years, that's the behavior that's going to carry them forward into their future years when they have a little bit more financial security in order to make some of those bigger purchases. So we noted earlier, I mentioned the first time. So this is what we took from our 2019 study. So 14 to 15, your first times, I'm sure everyone can remember the first time you went to a movie, probably the first solo experience that you had as a kid. Your parent drops you off in front of the movie theater, says they'll pick you up in 2 hours, and you feel like just the coolest, most free person in the world, that you're able to go purchase the ticket, purchase what food you want without someone saying no. Granted, you have probably limited funds, but you're making that first decision of what do you want to buy with that money. Same going for a meal at a restaurant and clothing. Now, let's not be, to give them too much credit here. They're not going to very fancy restaurants. They're probably going to more quick service restaurants, perhaps BPs. Again, they're probably going with friends, having a little meal, but that freedom to make the choice of what they want to try and where they want to go and what they want to do. Very much, again, impacted by their social interactions and who they're with in terms of their social circles. But it's those first times of trying new things and figuring out what they actually like, because they're not with their parents who's guiding that choice, those choices for them. And same to go with clothing. You're given a certain amount of money. You probably don't want to go back to school shopping with your parents anymore. You want to go with your friends, but it's up to you to make that choice of what you want to spend your money on and what items you want to take and what items you want to leave. So again, first experiences, but not only first experiences of trying things and exploring things, but first experiences of making those trade-off decisions. We have here the bank account. So for those of you that were here last week and also last year, we found that while we see that millennials don't have a lot of confidence in the traditional institutions, they're really looking at different avenues to kind of invest their money and keep their money and grow their money. The bank accounts do happen at the younger ages, generally because I'm sure everyone can remember going to the bank or calling the bank or sitting down with whoever you're sitting down with as an advisor with your parents and setting up that first bank account and getting your first debit card. And nowadays there's further to that. Kids can have, preloaded visas or preloaded, visas or debit cards, whatever it may be. There's different options. But if they're sitting down with a financial institution, it's happening at those younger ages. And then that's changing as they start to grow their habits and live through their years of firsts. As they get a little bit older, the 18 to 21, it falls a little bit back towards this is where their habits are forming. So while they're still experiencing firsts, the things that they were doing prior, like meals, clothing, entertainment, they're kind of deciding what they like and kind of the habits they have around those things. The first times as you get older get a little bit more advanced. So beer and cannabis are up here. I'm not trying to kid anybody that this is when everyone tries it for the first time, but this is generally the first time when youth can experience these things legally. They can go and sit in a restaurant and they can have a beer. They get ID'd and they can purchase whatever of these past illegal at the time products for them legally. And that's a big change for these youth and an exciting time for them. In terms of the cell phone, not saying that they didn't have it before, but this is generally the years where they're figuring out, maybe coming off of the parent plan because they have more part-time employment. They're deciding what they want in the product, what brand they want. They're being influenced by what they're seeing in advertisements in their social circles. They're also deciding what they want in terms of the actual product packages. So do they value the data? Do they value the talk time? Do they value the long distance? What is important to them is starting to evolve and happen during these years following their earlier years. Online shopping, again, as I mentioned, kids, if they don't have their own credit card already, they can have preloaded credit cards from their parents. They're seeing a lot of the explosion of online shopping lately, which isn't going to go anywhere. And they're so impacted by the algorithms and what's being thrown at them that it's just so easy for them. But the online shopping habits really start to evolve here. They're probably taking a few more trips when they get older. You can start renting a car, you can start purchasing a car, you can go on an airplane. Again, all of these exploration activities that they're having during these early years are all forming their habits that's going to carry on with them through their later years. So if you're not hitting them early and you're not having them identify with you and value the brand and your product and your services early, it's much harder to kind of infiltrate and reverse the habits they've already developed later on in life.
Now, talking about young consumers in 2022, there's some trends that we identified in the data this year that we think are crucial in terms of understanding younger consumers. But as Allison pointed out, because of the sheer demographic weight of the millennial population, they do have a lot of power. They also have the power to influence the generation just before them, mine, basically, Gen Xers, in that sort of what millennials want and their way of looking at the world is sort of contagious. And right now is having an impact on slightly older consumers as well. So it's very important to keep in mind that the trends influencing Gen Y and Gen Z in this study also is influencing shoppers in their 40s or early 50s, part of Gen X as well. One of the first things we wanted to look at is the impact of the pandemic on their habits as consumers. Now, one thing that's important, because some of these indicators that we talk about here, we're measuring them before the pandemic itself. So COVID did not create anything in terms of consumer trend, but the sheer acceleration of these trends during the pandemic is actually shaping our world that we see today, and probably emphasizes that these changes that were sort of pushed upon us during the pandemic are the habits that we will keep afterwards. As in anything else in life, once we discovered cars, very few of us went back to horses. And so this is what the pandemic has created for us. Look at these numbers for our young consumers. 57% of them accelerated their rate of purchasing online. They were already online purchasers before, but again, acceleration. Over half of them said, my physical activity, how I exercise, where I do it, has also been impacted by the pandemic as well. So rediscovering hiking, rediscovering camping for a lot of these younger generations while they couldn't travel abroad is something that will stick with them. 43% said the pandemic has had an impact on their eating habits. So of course they were sort of pushed away from restaurants during a period of the pandemic. A lot of them went to ready to meal kits at home and other alternatives to restaurants. And these new habits they acquired during the pandemic, they probably will carry on afterward as well. 40% said it's changing it's changed the way I dress. Again, a lot more casual wear, and we've seen this trend that sportswear is becoming streetwear, which is becoming everyday wear, which is becoming office wear. So a lot of these sort of the trend that we see in the clothing industry will carry forward as well. 39% said it's changed how I consider when I consider buying a home, but it's also has changed where they want that home to be. A lot of young sort of urbanites that sort of wanted to be downtown now maybe are giving sort of the suburbs another look because of how work has been restructured due to the pandemic. 39% said it's also given me sort of this additional motivation to shop more responsibly as an outcome of the pandemic. Part of it is buying local, which will continue sort of moving forward as well. So this as well is a trend that existed before the pandemic, again, simply accelerated by it. 36% say it's changed the way I get around. And we've seen that for a lot of them is their willingness to use their car less, again, for environmental reasons. 30% said it actually has had an impact on where they want to live. And again, as the pandemic modified our relationship to work, it's also modified our relationship to geography. The other thing that we notice about younger consumers is that they are becoming increasingly demanding. I like to say it anyway. They have sort of an inherent sort of bullshit detector when they actually look at what brands are saying about themselves. If you try to mask the truth about what you do and what your activities are, if you are basically just communicating sort of half truths about who you are and what you do, they will sort of catch you, and they will be extremely quick at actually getting all of their network on social media to understand what you're about. So you have to be growingly authentic in your communications and basically say what you are about and make sure that you actually walk the walk as well. So the era of communications, external and internal communications in businesses, that where you're basically just saying enough of the truth to look good, that's not good enough anymore. Growingly, you will have to be extremely coherent in how you communicate about yourselves. And I believe, and we'll see that a little bit later on in the presentation as well, it's this thing where purpose will become everything. I mean, as a company, as a brand, what's your purpose in life? And it's not only to provide a quality product at a reasonable price, that's just market entry. But you need to say, here's what I'm about and here's how I'm doing it. For some, it might be, I want to be net zero emissions by this date. Well, you'll have to walk the walk because again, these younger consumers will basically spot you. The same with those, I don't know, Allison, the number of applications out there that if you say that you are all about the environment, they can find out if your company has invested in fossil fuels somewhere else, and they'll sort of, you cannot hide anything anymore from consumers, and that's basically one of the areas where this new generation is putting a lot, is extremely demanding on brands. The other one is in terms of how or what influences their purchase decisions. When it's a very small purchase, most young Canadians will rely on peers to actually provide them with what's the best purchase here. So again, they will be looking at online reviews, offline reviews, and what basically is the buzz around your brand, and that will dictate how they shop, where they shop, and what they end up buying. If it's a more significant purchase, they'll go to their parents and friends in this particular instance. And only 5%, so in fourth place, they say influencers are actually having an impact on what I buy. But again, this number is low. Of course, influencers are not as important to peers when it comes to making purchase decisions, but the influence of influencers, well, that's not a very good sentence, it is a lot broader than what we see here, because those influencers are everywhere sort of around their social networks and are having actually more impact than we actually think. So they are extremely demanding. One of the ways that they are demanding is that it's all about their social conscience and sort of voting with their credit card. They actually want to buy, and they actually want to purchase things that align with their principles. Now, they cannot always do that because when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, you basically have a limited capacity to afford things that aligns directly with your values. You know, as Allison was pointing out, if you're sort of taking your children to daycare out of a home you can't afford into a daycare you can't afford in a car that you can't afford. You cannot necessarily do everything you want with your money. Uh, but what they would want to do with their money is actually spend on things that, again, correspond to their core social values in their lives. If you are that brand that can offer a competitive product at a competitive price that allows them to actually spend on something that actually is comforting for them because it aligns with their values, then you may be the champion of that category moving forward. Look at this. Over half of young consumers say they bought something secondhand over the past year. So basically this whole circular economy and this whole collaborative economy is actually gaining traction among younger consumers. 46% of young consumers said, I've tried to reduce using my car over the past year. 46 say I've reduced or want to reduce my reliance on fast fashion because they understand the weight or the carbon footprint of the fast fashion industry globally. 40% say I want to avoid overpackaged products. And very soon, if they go to their grocery store and they've got sort of the styrofoam packaging on one hand, and if a competitive brand is offering it in a compostable packaging, well, guess what decision they will take? 39% say they bought used clothing as well over the past year. And again, it all fits in with, one, their limited means, two, the fact that actually it's reducing their overall footprint in the world. 35% of young Canadians say I've reduced my consumption of meat. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be vegan. There's only 6% of young Canadians who are vegan, but it's turning a lot of young Canadians into flexitarians and other sort of alternative ways of considering food. And that 35% is extremely important. And if you looked at Nielsen numbers, you would see that this is actually having a deep impact at the cash register of your grocery store. 24% say I have boycotted a brand because of allegations of sexism, racism. This whole element of the culture of diversity is growingly important and is having an impact on how they shop. 23% say they've boycotted a brand because of its environmental footprint as well in the past. So again, extremely demanding. And if you don't align with their values, there is a chance that they will not look at you and sort of basically this whole cancel culture thing. Well, you can get canceled as a brand if you are not conscious of how just how demanding young consumers are becoming. Another element that defines this generation is anxiety. It was never easy to be a 20-year-old, but now the young Canadians are actually putting words on how you feel. I mean, 21% of youth say, I've suffered a major depression. It might not have been diagnosed by a physician, but at least that's what they believe. 39% say they've battled with bouts of depression, 48% moments of anxiety. What's interesting is when Allison was going over through sort of these life stages as you are moving from your late teens to your 20s and 30s, one thing that's very interesting is in those late teens, when you're going through your first times, your main source of anxiety is school, basically performance anxiety at school. Second source of anxiety then becomes sort of your social relationships and so on. When you move into your 20s, then it sort of flips around. Your main source of anxiety becomes time, followed by money. And moving into your 30s, well, that kind of just follows you. So 2/3 of youth say that they do feel that time is a primary reason why they feel anxiety. So this should dictate how we actually take care of our customers going through the purchase process or anything related to their path to purchase, but also post-purchase, whether they're doing it online or in store. One thing that's interesting when we look at the next trend that we are seeing is we ask the question of youth, what is the main reason why you bought this in store? They say it was more efficient, faster, quicker, better. We then ask, what is the main reason why you bought this product online? It was more efficient, faster, quicker, better. So no matter where they shop, internally, they feel that they don't have time to be there. So this should dictate exactly how we present our product, our web present, how we build our app about our product. Our in-store sort of brick and mortar is when a young consumer is walking in, that young consumer believes that they don't have the time to be there. It's the same thing when they're looking at a website as well. So relieve that anxiety, go through the whole sort of purchase process with your brand, the sort of and that's whole relationship with your customer, and look at the pain points in terms of where you're not delivering on being efficient, and that you are actually creating anxiety for your consumer because they always have that ticking clock in their minds. And if you look at a young, for example, a young woman in her early 30s with young children, I mean, time is the most precious thing that exists. And so please be conscious of that when you look at how you deliver a service or a product to your consumers.
So looking at their consumer journeys then, so we have all these characteristics of what makes them a consumer, but how does their purchasing journey look? How does their decisions look? How are they making purchases? So as Christian mentioned just on the last slide, that, you know, efficiency, that's why they shop online. Efficiency, that's why they would go to brick and mortar. Before, traditionally, you would decide you needed a product, whether you heard about it through advertising, friends, whatever it may be. You head to the store, you make the purchase. It's a very linear process, and you're done. You have your item, you go home, you're finished. Now, with young consumers, the journey is way more noisy. It's busier. There's fluctuations in where you're getting information and where you can go, and the options that are available to you seem endless. So it's way busier. It's way more fragmented. You're hearing information from advertising. You're getting it on your phone. You're seeing it in your emails. You're seeing it in your mailbox. There's just no getting away from all the information that's coming at you. And then you're seeing it from your friends, whether it's social media, what perhaps influencers fall in here as well, what they're promoting, what they're using, what you're seeing. You can options to go to the stores. You have options to buy online. And not only are you just seeing something and then going to make the purchase because it seems like you're interested in it, but you're also now kind of Googling everything. You're reviewing everything. You're looking for reviews to make sure that you're informed in your decision and making the right decision. When Christian and I were talking about this yesterday, I mentioned to him that I was in Walmart just last week and I'm looking for toys for one of my girls for Christmas, and I see the toy and it's one of those little fur reel animals that make noise and chatter the lips, and she really wanted it. She saw a picture, thought it was cute. So I have no idea what this thing does. If I touch it on the box, it just starts chattering and making noise, and I'm like, there has to be more to this toy than just doing this. So go on to Google it, find a video demonstration of it, and spoiler alert, it's all it does. But then what I found myself doing is, well, is this worth it? Is this worth me purchasing this? So here I am in Walmart spending, 5 minutes standing, looking at my phone, watching the video, seeing what it does. Then I'm going on to Amazon. So on Amazon, I'm checking reviews on the item. I'm also checking, is it cheaper on Amazon? Is it cheaper at Canadian Tire? Is it cheaper at Toys R Us? What sales do they have on? So not only am I now going to a store to make a purchase because I thought, you know, I want to go physically see this item, not just purchase it online, but now I'm also folding onto my experience my online interactions and all the online tools that are available to me before making that purchase. So there's so many different avenues and bits of information that are coming at consumers and that we can use, and we're so efficient at using them and making those choices. So whatever the product, whatever the brand, it needs to be just as efficient as the youth in helping them make those decisions in order to take them from needing something to purchasing something. So we also find that while, you know, we're very efficient shoppers, we have a lot of information available to us, we're also spendthrift consumers. Now, I'll admit, Christian and I had to Google spendthrift, and English is his second language, so I really don't have an excuse, but real word, if anyone else is wondering. But we're spendthrift as consumers, as a group. We want good brands, or what we feel are good brands. We want good quality. We're willing to spend the money, whether we have it or not. We're willing to spend the money on the items that we want. But that's kind of where it gets a little bit messier, because we're more willing to spend on non-essential products. So, you know, going to that 5-star, 3-star, whatever the rating is on the restaurant, or the brand new restaurant that's so exclusive to get in, you can only get reservations and you have to be there by 5, and it's going to cost you $200 without even, batting an eye, or $300, and then you've got your beverages on top of it. We want the brand name vehicles. We want the brand new vehicles, the things that, the generations before didn't have until much later in life, because they just had different mentalities around spending and values and what's important. Non-essential items. Another thing we have on here is fitness and well-being. We're going to the exclusive spin classes pre-COVID. Now, I know I have one. So many people jumped on the Peloton bike trend. Not cheap, but something that, very well marketed, very well, infiltrated the market at the right time, and really made a lot of headway among especially the younger generations. But while those might be kind of the non-essential or more frivolous, especially among the older generations, we're a lot cheaper when it comes to the essentials. So where we're going to bat our eyes is at the grocery store. We're going to go to stores where there's something. We're going to go to stores maybe where there's loyalty programs where we can get cash back and feel like we're getting something at a return on our investment. We're also going to, bigger box stores for groceries, and we're perhaps buying the no-name President's Choice, whatever the kind of store brand version of the product is, while perhaps the older generations value, the quality product in things like groceries and food purchases more so than our generation. But we bat an eye more at the essentials. So we bat an eye at the groceries. We bat an eye at our utilities. We're constantly looking for which utility provider is giving us something in return. Which utility provider is going to knock off X amount per year or per month if we switch over to them. We're constantly going to brokers to find cheaper insurance options. It's these kind of ration that we're making, and where we really struggle with spending our dollars, but we don't bat an eye as quickly to kind of those non-essential, more frivolous purchases. And again, we see it, especially, I know when you set up a bank account, another example there, with the fees and fees associated with not keeping X amount of dollars in the account, whatever it may be, those are things that people question or they complain about or, really nag about. But we're not going to go and complain about the $60 Peloton subscription per month plus the $60 per month payment that we're making on the bike. So different values, different opinions, and different way of spending. And really it's very spendthrift. So this was taken from last year's study. So we see it last year as well, these essential expenses, which we feel essential, cell phone packages, 58% are purchasing there. You see it for the internet, you see it for the insurance, electronics, big subscriptions to streaming services, which may seem ironic because a lot of people are canceling cable and moving to subscription, but are you saving any money when you've got 7 subscription channels that you're subscribing to? Are you saving time changing between the apps, or having the smart TV that you need to watch those apps on the television, and the time that it takes to switch between different providers and different channels? And then we see the vehicle expenses as well. So not only are we spendthrifts, but we're also very disorganized. Whether we would like to admit it or not, again, this is information that we pulled from last year. We found that 30% have a minimum monthly budget, while the older generations before us, 50% indicate having a monthly budget. So I remember when I first got my bank account and I had my checking book, and I'd have to write out every line. My dad would make me write out every line of every purchase that I made, subtract it from the balance, make sure, you're going to have enough at the end of the month. And that's kind of how I learned. But did I keep that up as I grew older? No. I mean, I have an app, a budget app, but that I try to keep up to, but it's not the same meticulous, organized way of managing the finances as I observed my parents in my personal situation doing. So I can relate to this a little bit. You know how much you have, you have a rough idea of what you want to spend. But I find that as youth, we have a lot easier time justifying some of our more extravagant or less essential purchases than perhaps the past generations did. We also saw that 21% of the 30 to 39-year-olds live paycheck to paycheck, but spend constantly. So I like this is me. This is my generation. This is my kind of age cohort, and definitely can see it and relate to it. There never seems to be enough money to put as much as you want away into saving, if you're saving anything at all per month. But you have perhaps a new vehicle. You go out to eat a couple times a week. You have, that designer winter coat. I'm saying winter just because it's winter time. Whatever it may be. Or as we get older, your children may have some of those things. So it's again, just perspective, and how that has changed throughout the years. In terms of financial goals, of course, we're seeing, they want to purchase a property. They want to have a vehicle, whether new or new to them. But these are some of the things that's also causing them great anxiety that we're seeing among the youth, that they don't know if this is something achievable to them. But whether they know it or not, perhaps it's not so achievable because of how disorganized and how spendthrift we are.
One thing that we saw as well, it's this idea of the value-seeking consumer as well. If they choose your organization, it's because they're okay with who you are, what you do, and what's your purpose as a company. They feel a certain sense of responsibility for encouraging businesses that represent them and their own values. But they also want to have this sort of feeling of community, that they are part of something, that they are part of change. You'll see it next week when we actually talk about youth at work. But this sort of feeling that they are part of the solution in a way is something that actually motivates them. Sometimes, of course, they can't go for the products they would want that do represent that positive change because they don't have the money for it, but that's what they seek to do or want to do. If you can be that brand that puts themselves in the middle of that sort of spiral of becoming part of this community, that's where you actually become important in their lives. That, and also offering this capacity for them to personalize your product or personalize the experience that they have with your product as well, makes them feel that they are important and valued as a customer, but also as a citizen, as we saw last week as well. So think about that equation in terms of how you can actually sort of be part of that young consumer's life and make sense of why they are spending their money. Give it a purpose in some way, and be authentic about it, and be true to actually what your values are. And it also should be what dictates how you act as an employer, because your most important ambassador is your employee. And again, that is extremely important to young workers, as well, as we'll see next week. So always think about this equation moving forward in terms of how you actually represent the values that are important to this generation, because it is a high caliber motivator for them to buy your brand.
So what are our strategic recommendations? So first, the young consumer wants efficiency, whether in terms of time or money. So whether we are looking to make a purchase on our phone because we can see the stock, I'll use Canadian Tire as an example, but you don't want to go wait in the line, maybe have 2 items left, you're making that purchase, then you're going to pick it up in the store. Whatever the efficiency is for that consumer, you need to be efficient on all aspects of how they can receive your product, as we saw in their journey. Everything is political, including their consumption. It must embody their values and principles. And as Christian just went over on the last slide, it's really important to make sure that you're making those impacts and kind of getting into their world and their minds, and at that younger ages, so that while they may not be able to purchase from the companies and the brands that they want to at those young ages, you can get in there and start getting into their opinions and perspectives, and have your brand identify with them and have them identify with you, so that when they are in those later life stages that they're able to spend a little bit more and perhaps then attain some of those products, you're still there and you're part of those younger years, habit forming years. And also the young consumer is disorganized, spendthrift, and they need a better financial support system. So we keep seeing it year after year. They're less confident in the financial institutions. We're disorganized in how we're planning for our finances, which ironically enough could probably be helped a lot if we reached out to the financial institutions a little bit more. The advice perhaps that we're receiving from our parents and the older generations don't quite fit into the values and the expectations that we have for our lives. So really trying to figure out how to best support the young consumers financially in what works for them and addresses their ambitions and goals and values. So next week, Nicholas is back and we'll be presenting being a young worker in 2022. So more importantly, what are employees looking for? What are they valuing? What do they want from their employer? How happy are they currently? All of those will be addressed next week, which is also the last series of our webinar. So please be sure to register. You can find us on LinkedIn for December 16th, 2021. And if you would like any further information, you can reach out to info@leger360, and Christian and I will open it up to questions at this time. They start off slow, Christian. Thank you, everyone. I know we have you 10 minutes before we want to get you out, but any questions, we'll be happy to take a stab at them.
And in the meantime, just going back to something you mentioned earlier as well, the whole sort of study, just sort of the full deck with all the analysis will be made available and sent to all participants of either or all three of our webinars. So you should get that. It's kind of a little bit like our Christmas gift before the year ends.
Perfect, yeah. Try to get it as close to Christmas.
Yeah.
All right, Christian, I guess we just did that. Oh, here we go. I jinxed it. On the slide that mentioned insurance, any comments on what is driving lower take-up for Generation Z?
Yeah. Oh, it's not necessarily lower take-up. Thank you for asking the question. It's that proportion of youth who say they spend too much or that insurance costs too much. And just to highlight again, going back to that point, that in the things that you need to have, like car insurance, for example, or home insurance, this is where youth feel they spend too much, as opposed to they don't feel they spend too much on things that are not necessary in your life, which are those, Crave on top of Netflix, on top of Disney, on top of DAZN, and all of the other streaming apps that you may have.
Leave it for a couple more minutes. Is it fair to conclude that they are more focused on price for insurance then?
I would say that's probably one of the areas where they will be extremely price sensitive. And now with the new pricing apps that a lot of the insurers are offering out there, it gives them that ability to be very, very savvy shopping for insurance moving forward. So I would agree with that comment as well.
So the tie percent on that page are those? Yes, that's correct.
Yes. All right. I guess we should give them sort of an 8-minute break before the next Zoom or Teams meeting starts at 1 for those who are on their lunchtime.
Thank you, everyone. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. And when you receive the report, if you have any further questions about the report itself, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we hope to see you all next week when we talk about young employees. All right, everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.
Bye-bye.